Such an honor to be here, especially with you, Admiral Richardson. With our time constraints, I think we just get going talking about sea power and how the United States history with sea power affects our global tensions and how we deal with our adversaries.
Great, thank you, Morgan. And first, before I get going, and as people continue to kind of come in from lunch, I think it's always appropriate to start by thanking Megan for just all of the coordination. I think, yeah, absolutely. It's break us out of the food coma here, get a little kinetic. And also the Connecticut National Guard. I mean, just in terms of making everything flow, they've been fantastic. Yeah, go ahead, absolutely. Yeah. I also want to kind of endorse, add my voice to some of the well, first of all, wasn't that about the Best Ukraine panel that you've had a chance to listen to? I mean, just the insights from that were absolutely fantastic. I know I learned a ton. And so I think that's just characteristic of the quality of this event. So once again, to all the organizers, really just super well done. And more to come in the afternoon. One of my professors and mentors, Jim Holmes, is going to be joining us virtually from the Naval War College. He is always high energy and sporty, right? And so you can always expect a lot of kinetic stuff from him. The person who will follow this panel is Paul Shari from the Center for New American Security. He'll talk about AI. He'll, I'm sure, mention his book, Four Battlegrounds, absolutely top thinker. And his colleague there, Becca Wasser, will also be, I think, on Morgan's panel, joining, as with Jim Holmes, too, right? So you have two virtual panelists there, but just some, absolute top quality thinkers. And if the theme of this panel or this day is tipping points, then you kind of had me at hello, right? You've got to sort of really be an ostrich with your head in the sand, not to realize that we are undergoing more than one tipping point or inflection point, if you want to talk about it that way, as we speak. And I'll just talk about two. One is kind of a global political inflection point, and we heard a lot about the effects of that as we talk through the details of the Ukrainian war, and so there's that one going on. As the economy moves more and more towards Asia, as politically, there is a general decline in the index of free countries in the world, right? Authoritarian powers are growing, whereas democratic and free powers are declining, have been for about 15 years. And so that's kind of the global political inflection point that's going on. There's also a technological inflection point going on, right? When you start to talk about technologies like you'll talk about next session, artificial intelligence, quantum technologies, the biotechnologies that have been going on, where we can literally get into a gene and start to edit your gene sequence, that's really something. And these technologies are going to certainly allow us to do things that we do now faster and cheaper and better. But the real measure of a revolution or an inflection point is we're simply going to be able to do things that we could not do before, right? When you talk about things like quantum entanglement, post-quantum cryptography, artificial intelligence, these are new things that humanity has never been able to do before. And we are in the middle of that inflection point right now. The CEO, Andy Grove, who drove a lot of this inflection point as the CEO of Intel, said that as the CEO, he worried about a lot of things, but the thing he worried most about was missing a strategic inflection. And if you think about, the folks that can catch that wave and move forward, those are the technologies and the companies that you hear about right now, Google, Amazon, Meta, you name them, right? Apple. You can also, they're Harvard Business Case studies, right? Those companies that missed it, Blockbuster, Kodak, they just missed the inflection point. And so these are kind of digital points, right? You're either going to survive with a 1 or you're going to fade into obscurity with a zero, and so the stakes can never be higher. And I think that these times also cause us to examine our assumptions. What are the fundamental assumptions that are guiding our behavior right now? And that's what Morgan and I want to explore with you today, is the assumption, perhaps the fact, that America is a maritime nation, okay? And what does that mean? You can throw that phrase around a lot, but I would just propose as a definition that being a maritime nation means that your national prosperity, your security, and your influence are inherently linked to the seas. And I think there's a quote that'll help us focus on that. And this quote goes like this: "Historical experience tells us that countries that embrace the sea thrive, while states that spurn the sea decline." Okay, so I'd ask you just to kind of let that marinate in the back of your mind right now. And the cool thing about the career that Morgan has, and the other midshipmen here, those who choose to sail in the seas, is that our maritime forces, they influence across all elements of national power, right? So if you wanted to talk about the diplomatic element of national power, certainly there's a rich history of the Navy being at the forefront of many of the most influential diplomatic agreements that were made. And if you've ever made a port call on a U.S. Navy warship, you know that overseas, you know that warship is sovereign U.S. territory. And it's off, the ambassador, the U.S. ambassador to that country will often host a reception for all the VIPs in that country because he's on home ground when he crosses the bow of that ship. And so there's a huge influence on our diplomacy by the Navy. If you want to talk about the informational dimension of national power, 90% of the global internet traffic travels on undersea cables, okay? They transit, they rest on the bottom of the sea, and in fact, the ocean floor is becoming increasingly populated with different types of infrastructures and technologies to reach different parts. So, as moving information, right? We talk about the cloud, we should be talking about the lake, right? We look up, the information's in the sea. The military element of national power, you just have to read the papers to see that the seas, the South China Sea is mentioned a lot, the Black Sea is mentioned a lot these days. The seas are becoming increasingly contested and hotbeds of confrontation among navies and among nations. As we strive to continue to secure trade routes and access to global markets for all of us. It was mentioned last panel, this rules-based international order that was put in place by the United States and its allies after World War II. And that rules-based international order has created a system of maritime trade that has allowed all nations to prosper on a pretty level playing field. And that includes some nations. It started for sure for our allies and partners, but of late, it includes a lot of nations that we would all agree would not be counted among our allies and partners. Nations like China, who's grown tremendously, including through their maritime trade, and others. And so there's that part of the contest. There's also just the raw security part, and this is where the benefits of being buffered by the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans become clear. You just have to, if we stand on the coast here in Connecticut and look out beyond Long Island Sound, we're pretty much got free access to the entire Atlantic Ocean, all right? If you look out and you're standing in San Francisco or anywhere on the West Coast and you look out, free access to the entire Pacific. If you're standing on the coast of China and you look out, not so fast, right? There's what's, termed the first island chain. And there's this barrier of coastal islands that run up and down the coast of China. And many of those are nations who are our allies. And the U.S. has bases on many of those islands, right? And so, the operative word here, if you're China, is chain. It really does look like, a chain that can be pretty tough to break through if you're fighting, opposing forces to go through those choke points. Whereas in our open ocean defense, we have a nice layered defense. The Coast Guard provides a lot of that. We sort of see these forces coming in from a good distance out and can respond. And then finally, so I've mentioned diplomatic, information, military, final economic dimension of national power. 85% of all global commerce travels on the seas. 67% of our economy is directly linked to the seas. 30% of GDP is directly attributed to maritime trade. And so, I hope you start to see how our prosperity and our security are inherently linked to the seas. And that trade figure is really just the direct trade. The other thing about that international rules-based order is that all of those exchanges that happen around the world, almost no matter who the trading partner is, are made in US dollars, okay? And that means that most of those transactions are processed through our financial institutions, our accounting institutions, and so it's very important to make sure that, that double benefit, we preserve that. So those are the kind of four elements of national power, all of them deeply tied to the sea. I'll mention another one that was talked about this morning, which is climate, all right? And climate change and the sea are, again, inherently linked, this really global challenge. And so as the temperature rises, as major currents in the ocean change direction, change their flow, they carry with them all of the food stocks, the fish, and everything else that people rely on for their food, right? And entire coastal nations. And so you can see as that changes, as rivers get lower and lower and perhaps dry up, as the temperature rises, it's going to create all of these conflicts. The sea is going to be a huge part of the climate change challenge. And the sea is also one of the biggest repositories of CO2. And so it's inherently linked to the climate change problem. So anyway, I'll stop there because I know that Morgan is standing by. We're all set to have a great conversation here. Then we'll turn it over to questions for a little bit. And at 1300, which is in 35 minutes, I'm walking out of here to go catch a plane. So we'll keep it crisp. Morgan, thanks so much.
Just first of all, phenomenal. We have a lot to talk about, hopefully, that we can get through in the time we have. I just want to circle back to talking about climate change and the opening of the Arctic region, especially with the position that the U.S. is poised to take. I mean, Russia has 53% of the coastline in the Arctic, 2.5 million people, and pretty much entirely controls the Northwest Passage, or the Northern Sea Route, excuse me.
Yeah.
And beyond that, has half control of the Bering Strait, as we do with Alaska. So in a realm where we see the U.S. is not poised to take a maritime power role, with Russia dominating in nuclear icebreakers, a fleet of icebreakers over 20 times the size of the U.S. fleet, I just find it interesting to see how that will go and how the U.S. is going to adapt and use our allies as the Arctic region opens.
Yeah, no, I think you've really hit on a super interesting, topic, and of course, that's inherently tied to climate change as well, right? So the Arctic ice cap is as small as it's ever been since we started measuring it, and it's getting smaller. And just as you said, that's going to give rise to, new dynamics, right? So there's going to be new navigational routes that were never open before that are now, that allow that maritime traffic I talked about to flow through those routes, skipping through a bunch of choke points that they used to have to go through. They save a lot of time, and so that's going to make a huge difference. Just moving that trade around, access to those seas, as well as that ice cap recedes, it's going to also uncover continental shelves and seabeds that are going to be rich with resources, and so there's going to be a competition to get access to those resources as well. And so this is where I often like to put in a plug for the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea. That is the rule set that sort of governs these types of situations, and it would be terrific if the United States could find its way to be a signatory of that treaty. Right now we, by and large, behave in accordance with it, but we're not a signatory. And so, but you're right. In this kind of inflection point that we're seeing, this tipping point, giving the Arctic a greater priority is going to be key. I'll tell you what, we sent a carrier strike group up north when I was CNO in 2019 for the first time since the Cold War. And let me tell you, it's still really damn cold up in the Arctic, okay? And that's what, and we had to open a lot of old books to try, to train ourselves how to safely operate up there, because not only is it cold, but the seas are very heavy, and our satellite coverage is not great, so navigation is difficult, communication is difficult. It is, an operational art to operate effectively in the Arctic that far north. And I'll just share with you, one of the things that we found was that we had to load this strike group out with a bunch of baseball bats. And so we talked to Louisville Slugger, and they made us a bunch of baseball bats, because even these days, with all this high technology, there is nothing better for bashing the ice off your superstructure than a good old American baseball bat. And so we made a bunch of baseball bats. So to your point, we are running out of time where we can really ignore that, and we've got to give it appropriate priority.
You mentioned the bypassing of maritime choke points. I just want to touch on that. We've seen what can happen when access to those choke points are blocked with the Suez Canal last year, and we see Bering Strait, we're not going to have full control of that choke point. We've seen what can happen to the global economy when, as you spoke on before, so much of it is controlled by the sea. And I think that's going to have to be a major focus of maintaining control and keeping those choke points open to maritime trade, especially with so much of the U.S. domestic trade happening over the ocean.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And so a lot of times when you look out and you think about trade across the sea, and if you've been out, to sea yourself, you can just imagine that it's sort of, this flat, wide open ocean, and it's really easy to move around. But the truth of the matter is much different, as you pointed out. They call them choke points, and whether it's Gibraltar, Malacca, Suez, Bering, you name them, Panama, the vast amounts of our trade flow through those choke points, right? Something like 33% of the world's economy flows through the South China Sea and the Strait of Malacca, Strait of Singapore. And so when we talk about those bodies of water being important, that's why, right? That trade is coming towards us. Now, the benefits of having a global navy with our allies and partners, working closely together with them, is that we do have, I think, an advantage in being able to control traffic through those choke points. When you talk about Hormuz, there was a lot of mention of Iran in the last few sessions, in the morning sessions. Geography is destiny, and there they are, right on the Strait of Hormuz. Tremendous power to kind of disrupt the world's flow of energy that comes out of the Persian Gulf. And so these, being able to maintain free flow of traffic through those choke points, that's one of the missions of the United States Maritime Forces, acting with our allies and partners. As our adversaries grow in maritime power, their ability to disrupt those or close those is something that we've got to pay really close attention to, because as you pointed out, that one ship that just went sideways in the Suez created havoc, and you're taking the long way around, and both from a time, money, and insurance perspective, that gets to be costly very fast.
One last thing I wanted to touch on before we open up for audience questions. You mentioned our adversaries, growing in their naval capacity, and I think we can't properly have a sea power talk without talking about China as a rising sea power, with the aggression in the South China Sea, the Belt and Road Initiative, investing in ports all over the world, and opening their first international naval base in Djibouti in 2017. Starting to see them moving towards a global navy, which I personally feel like that could be something that we deal with as the U.S. in the future, as our adversaries become, more global, which is something that we in the past have had major control over.
Yeah. No, I think you're right, and I think we're already seeing that. Let's just say, not confrontation yet, thank goodness, but rising tension for sure. We are managing that, that competition, if you will, and so, I think that one, it's really important that we move forward. We continue to strengthen our Navy. We continue to flow these decisive technologies into the hands of our sailors and Coast Guardsmen, our merchant mariners, the whole team. We need to maintain a robust shipbuilding industrial base, which has shrunk dramatically since the Cold War. We really kind of were hotly competing on a global level. The Chinese Navy has been completely transformed and is now the biggest Navy, right? And so we've got to just be very, very mindful of that. Just like we as a nation, at some point around 1900, we determined that to continue to thrive, we had sort of maximized our ability to do that within our continental bounds, and we had to go overseas, right? And so that required a global Navy to secure those access to those markets and trade routes. And so things like the Naval War College and the Naval Postgraduate School were stood up to develop a global Navy, officers that could think strategically. And that stood us so well, that effort, through really kind of victory in World War II, right, and beyond. And so, as we think about a very similar time, the 1900s to now, you had the Industrial Revolution, you had the rise of the United States as the global preeminent power. So you had these two inflection points, just like we have now. And the team that got that right set the rules of the debate for the next 50 to 75 years. We need to get it right this time. We need to be a fast-learning team because, as I said, the stakes are very high. And just to give you a sense for where China's mind is, I opened with that quote, right? Historical experience tells us that countries that embrace the sea thrive, while states that spurn the sea decline. Yeah, that could be easily Nelson, any British statesman, a U.S. statesman, but that quote was actually from Xi Jinping as he spoke to his Politburo in 2013. And so just exactly to your question, it gives you some insight as to where China is thinking in terms of the maritime. Okay. Questions from the audience?
Oh, sorry. Hi, my name's Neil Barron. I'm an airman in the Connecticut Air National Guard. We talk a lot about rules-based order, and it seems to me like a lot of folks or a lot of our adversary nations are jumping off the ship in terms of caring about the rules that we're holding ourselves to. So I would be curious, from your perspective as former CNO, if you see a need for us to take a more granular look at the rules and see where they need to change so we can be perhaps a little more agile in confronting our adversaries. Thank you.
Well, I think that the rules that I'm talking about are kind of the rules for international conduct, right? And so whether that be financial, economic, military, et cetera, I think that the last panel made a very good point that with respect to conflict, and even the way the military is organized, trained, equipped, and operates, a lot of those structures, right, are being challenged by some of our emerging adversaries. They just don't see seams and phases and, you know, the breakdowns that we're very, very comfortable with, right? And so, you know, one of the last panelists asked, hey, are we in conflict now or not? It's a great question to think about. You know, another version of that is, well, what if we're in conflict? What phase of the conflict are we? You know, that sort of structure is almost, what about the geographic combatant commands, right? Those dividing lines that separate those, they're kind of almost being used to our disadvantage, right? By our enemies who see this as a seamless cloth of conflict, blending together all of those elements of national power to just achieve their aim. And so, you know, I think we need, as one of the consequences of Russia overplaying their hand in Ukraine and invading Ukraine, I mean, and then I think, you know, China as well, kind of being more strident and that creating a reaction in response, is you're seeing the West take its own side in this fight a little bit more strongly, which includes kind of doubling down on, you know, that rule set that has served the world so well, right? And you know, no doubt about it, has served the United States and its allies and partners well as too. So we need to kind of, you know, strengthen that, right? We need to, one, believe in it. I think a lot of that for the United States needs to begin here domestically, you know, where we need to kind of believe in ourselves a lot more strongly in terms of what we offer to the world as a, you know, as a value proposition, and fall in behind that. Our allies, I think, are very eager, and that would be welcome. And, you know, then we can really double down on that order that you talk about. Yeah, sir, you had a question here?
Thank you. Bill Clifford of the Johns Hopkins SAIS Foreign Policy Institute.
What an amazing place, first of all.
Thank you. And former president of the World Affairs Councils of America, but not anymore. Presidents from both parties have supported the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, and I was glad you mentioned it. I would love to hear you go into a little more detail on why it is in the interest of the U.S. and how not ratifying it undermines U.S. foreign policy in a way that would resonate with the U.S. Senate.
Okay, I was with you until that last part. And so I'm just not sure I'm that good. You know, if I was, we would already be signatories, right? So, now, you know, I think that there's a lot of different perspectives on that. Does it really provide a level playing field? Would we be signing into something that, you know, in some situations we wouldn't want to abide by? And I think that, you know, those sorts of exceptions to any kind of rule set are going to emerge. But I'll tell you what, when these sorts of disputes arise that could be governed by UNCLOS, it does undermine our credibility that we just are not signatories to it, right? China is a signatory to it, and you know, they mention that, right? And so we behave by and large in accordance with the tenets of the treaty. You know, the other thing is that if you haven't read like the Straits Times from Singapore, it's just a great, yeah, I think it's online, I'm sure it is. And you know, some of the op-eds and the editorials in that paper are just, you know, stunningly astute, right? Because of where they are in the world. And one of them was this gentleman named Tommy Coe. I'd advise you all to look out for anything written by Tommy Coe. He's written a couple of books. He was one, he was one of the lead negotiators that brought UNCLOS to a close. And I was at an international conference of chiefs of Navy in Singapore, and you know, somebody, I think it was the delegation from China, said, hey, you know, we're thinking about let's reopen UNCLOS and refashion it with Asian characteristics, right? And then he went on to talk a little bit about what that meant. And this audience, which was largely composed of Asian navies, really took that on. And oh, by the way, Tommy Coe was moderating the panel. And so the first thing the guy got was a dressing down from Dr. Coe, who just talked about, hey, you know, you can't cherry pick what you like out of a treaty like UNCLOS because, you know, everything is a compromised balance, right? And so if you want to, you know, not pay attention to exclusive economic zones and what are the rules that govern those, or territorial seas or whatever it might be, you're throwing the whole thing out of whack. And it took him 10 years to get to an agreement on that, right? And so, you know, one, you can kind of see how hard fought these types of rule sets are. And then two, you know, to be a signatory, I think, would just be one less thing that we have to address as we're going through negotiations to date. And, you know, as Morgan super astutely said, with things like the Arctic and stuff opening up, we're going to be back into these types of disputes even more in the future. And things like UNCLOS could really help if we all behaved and signed up to it. So I don't know if that would compel anybody, but that's kind of the way I see it.
Good afternoon, Admiral. This morning we heard about divest to invest, and the sense from our speaker from Lockheed Martin, you know, a sense of collaboration between the military forces and Lockheed. Two questions to you. Is the Navy's...
Just Lockheed?
Just, well, Boeing as well. But two questions. Is the Navy's focus on divest to invest proper? And how did we get into our shipyard shipbuilding conundrum?
Yeah. Well, the shipyard shipbuilding thing, I'll start with that. I think really just 25 years of being the sole superpower. And, you know, by and large, things have gone okay in international trade, right? I mean, you talk to leaders of industry, multinational corporations, and you talk about the potential vulnerability that will confront us if, you know, China wants to do something with those islands that they built and armed in the South China Sea, or, as Morgan pointed out, somebody wants to double down on the Strait of Hormuz or one of these choke points. And it sounds pretty theoretical because we've had decades and decades of uncontested trade, okay? There's a book written by Seth Cropsey called Sea Blindness. And, you know, I mean, it's kind of an interesting word, and it describes a lot of, you know, what we as a maritime nation, even as a maritime nation, are subject to, which is that by and large it goes pretty well. It goes pretty well until it doesn't, right? And I think that during those decades where it went pretty well, we saw a big offshoring of the shipbuilding industry, to the point now where the biggest shipbuilder in the world is China. And they enjoy about 50%, I think, of the global merchant trade is built, if not flagged, by China. We're at about the 3% level right now. And if you think about the challenge to the supply chain, some of this made super acute by the war in Ukraine, COVID and other things, you know, we're starting to see a real vulnerability, right? That these vulnerabilities are becoming much more tangible. Okay, so that's, I think, you know, kind of the underlying reason that we're having to, you know, recover our shipbuilding prowess here in this country. With respect to divest to invest, you know, I talked about this dual inflection point, particularly with the one with technology. You know, these types of big revolutions, they have very few examples in our past from which we can learn, right? I mentioned the 1900s and the impact of the Industrial Revolution and the global political revolution that happened at that time. The other one that we can learn from is at the end of World War II, right? The whole world collapsed into a bipolar structure with the Warsaw Pact in the West, and we saw the advent of nuclear technologies and space technologies, which were game-changing, once again, allowed us to do things we simply couldn't do before as humans. And so what are the lessons you can draw from those 2 points? Well, with respect to divest to invest, one is it's so intense a change that you almost can't predict what's going to be on the other side, right? So the attributes that you want to instill in navigating through that are the ability to learn faster than your adversary, okay? You really just have to be a fast learning organization. And so, keeping that in mind, I'm all about investing in new technologies, but when it comes to the security of our nation, I'd like to have a little bit more than a PowerPoint brief that stuff will work, okay? And so I think that this time should be highly characterized by experimentation, prototyping, war games, I would say fleet exercises, ground exercises, to test out these new technologies to make sure that they deliver on some of the promises that are being made, okay? And we mature these technologies. We really don't have that in our acquisition system right now. It's highly centralized, it's overanalyzed, it's underdelegated, and we don't do a lot of that in kind of the modern times. We might be breaking back into that, but I think we need to do a lot more of that. That way, when we leave behind a technology, divest from that, and invest in a new technology, we'll have so much more confidence in that investment than that it'll really deliver on the promises it makes.
Hello, Admiral.
Okay, this is just unfair.
Come on.
All right.
So, Admiral, we seem to have ceded the Black Sea to the Russians. So what should the U.S. and NATO be doing in terms of Black Sea security? And as you know, through the Montrose Agreement, Turkey really allows things into the straits into the Black Sea.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that?
No, that's an amazing choke point right there, right? The Dardanelles and the Bosphorus and Turkey. Oh, yeah. And then, once you're inside, because of that, you're inside, right? And it's tough to get out. So if you're going to go in and contest the Black Sea, you better have a winning team inside the Black Sea, right? Because if you find yourself getting behind in terms of logistics, just being able to replenish that force, you're going to find yourself very difficult to catch up. So again, I would say that to the degree that we make these, challenges bilateral, the U.S. versus Russia, the U.S. versus China, whatever they are, I think we give up some of our strategic advantage, which is through our alliances and partnerships. And so, those other nations that are Black Sea states, if you will, we need to be, investing a lot. And they're ready. Romania, all of those nations there, they're ready to flow in. And then this is an area where I think the headlines have really shown that some of these technologies that you talked about, General, they may not be the deciding factor. I agree with you that this is a human endeavor. Warfare is a human thing at the end of the day. But the Ukrainians have done some pretty stunning stuff with drones, surface drones, and other technologies to kind of throw a wrench in the Russians' attempted dominance of the Black Sea. And so, and I think that there's a lot of lessons there, sir, for not only continued conflict in the Black Sea, where distance is not really a big problem like it is across an ocean. Lessons for the Taiwan Strait as well. What sort of technologies are we learning about there that can be used and then could be also adapted and employed in a Taiwan Strait type of scenario? I'm sure a lot of people are watching that very closely.
Great question. Great answers. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So just so you know, I got a speech in a couple of days on Black Sea, so I'm thinking all
Yeah, I'll tell you, since we're, any other questions, or should we just kind of wax?
We have a question from our virtual audience, actually.
Oh, okay. And General, I want to come back to you because there are some wrong lessons being drawn by the sinking of the Moskva. All right. Yeah, okay. All right.
All right, so our virtual question is, our nuclear defense strategy is greatly determined by the capabilities of our threats. So how would the fielding of a nuclear submarine by North Korea force us to adapt our deterrence strategies?
Well, I think, what do nuclear submarines bring to a navy and a nation? If operated properly, and that's a big if, they bring the ability to, if you think about that nuclear submarine as a force element, it's got to have armament, right, payload. It's got to be properly operated. It's got to have communications. And what nuclear power brings you is tremendous range, okay? Kind of unlimited range until you run out of food, depending upon what's on board. And so you can play an away game with a nuclear-powered submarine force in a way that you just can't do with a conventionally powered force. And so that's kind of the top level. Now, the devil is in the details with these things. And so, how really capable is this thing, right? I don't know. And if I told you, I'd have to kill you, right? But, putting something out there that is nuclear powered and very loud underwater doesn't provide a whole lot of increased capability because that thing's not going to last very long, right? And so you really have to do, second and third level analysis to figure out what this really adds beyond propaganda to a nation like North Korea's arsenal. It's concerning, right? It's concerning that they can harness that technology, encapsulate it, and put it on a submarine. That is not an easy thing to do at all. To do it skillfully and at a competitive level is harder still. I think we have to learn more about that, and then we'll be able to answer that a little bit more completely. There's a question in the back. I thought maybe I saw somebody raise their hand. Yes, sir. Okay. Well, we could talk all day about submarines. I mean, go ahead.
Well, especially since. Sorry.
Hi, Jim Hillbolt. I'm on the board at the council. Especially since New London is just a few miles from here.
It's a hop, skip, and a jump, right?
Hop, skip, and a jump.
Yeah.
Just love to hear your thoughts on the future of the American submarine force and its importance.
Yeah. Future, in terms of demands, tremendous, right? I'm very bullish on submarines. The challenge is, of course, not only with the submarine force, not only with the Navy, but also with the Army and the other services, is meeting that challenge. And as we think about, we talked about the industrial base a little bit, very challenged across the nation, no matter what you're doing. If you're building something big and complicated, you've got challenges. You've got workforce challenges, you've got supply chain challenges, you've got quality challenges, all of those things. And the submarine industrial base, the Navy's industrial base, Army's industrial base, all of them, we're not immune from those challenges. And so, and then, manning, crewing, getting the people, men and women, to crew those submarines is increasingly challenging as well. And so, and maintaining them, et cetera. So, is the demand for the Navy and the submarine force great in the future? Yeah, I hope we've made the point that for a maritime nation, the answer to that is yes. Against a country that is building increasingly capable anti-access types of technologies, the ability to go in with stealth and not be seen, that becomes increasingly valuable. So great future. We got to step into it aggressively and make sure we don't miss a march there. I have a question, sir, if I could, and it's for Midshipman McPeak. And so our conversation, and I apologize, I've kind of talked too much, so I want to hear from you, is that America is a maritime nation. And I think that because you're sitting here as a first-class midshipman, at some level you agree with that. What spoke to you as you were growing up that said, you know what, I want to go and be part of this maritime nation, the maritime forces, and join the Navy?
I mean, I think you look at the very storied history of the U.S. Navy. Everything from diplomacy of the Great White Fleet to, the heroics of the battles of Midway and Savo Island. I think just looking at that, it was seeing something that would always be of great importance to our nation. Notwithstanding, of course, all armed services will always be of great importance to our nation. But the type of service, the type of importance that the Navy had really spoke to me, and that was something that I really thought would be fulfilling that I wanted to do with my life.
Great. And I have one other question, a follow-up. For everybody else in America of your generation, what could we say to that generation that would resonate with them that we do need to take our own side in this fight? And if I could, furthermore, in the maritime dimension of national power?
I think it's just bringing back the level of pride that we as Americans have historically had in our country. I think, recognizing that we don't fight for what the United States is, we fight for everything it stands for and everything it could be. I think that's something people have lost sight of, and see the United States as what it is now and not what it could be if we continue to serve our country and fight for it.
That's a mic drop moment. Let's give Morgan a round of applause for that, right? Okay. Yeah, to all the cadets and midshipmen in the room who, I just, to everybody here, that all of them, brilliant people like Morgan just demonstrated, right? And Morgan and all of these young people could have chosen to work literally anywhere in the world. They could have written their own ticket anywhere in the world. And instead, they chose to raise their right hand and take an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. And I agree with you, Morgan, that I think that's because of the value proposition that these people, many of our young people, want to serve something bigger than themselves. You have shown how to do that in vivid technicolor. And now it's, we need to be that force that lives up to that promise, right? And a nation that lives up to that. So thank you very much for joining me here on stage. Thank you all for being so patient. Sir, I'll turn it back, well, Morgan, I'll turn it back over to you.
No, sir, I think.
Okay.
I'm just mindful you have a flight to catch, if I remember right.
Oh yeah, I do. I lost track of time.
Let's give him another round of applause. That was definitely chess, not checkers, right?